Hello and welcome to the Real Estate Macro Podcast. I am excited to be joined by my friend George Roberts, who has a very interesting background, and I can't wait to delve into it. So, George, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me on the show today, Douglas.
And George, how did you get here?
I got here through Zoom. The internet is amazing. There are probably some hamsters running on a
That's right.
wheel somewhere way off in cyberspace, making all of this possible.
Great Scott, 1.21 gigawatts, as Doc Brown would say. Um, George, can we talk a little bit about? I am so fascinated by your background because it's a little outside the norm, I would say, probably for most real estate syndicators. Is really fascinating. Love to delve into your educational background because you have a really incredible education in terms of data science and really scientific skills is really fascinating. How did you choose your direction when you first got started?
Are we going way back to the
Yeah,
scientific
all the
background?
way back to
Oh, wow.
PhD and all that. I'd love to go into that. Yeah,
All right, we're
absolutely.
opening it way up here. Well, I just did extraordinarily well in my science classes and I enjoyed it. I felt a calling.
Mm,
And it is very exciting. It is, however, something that does not tend to pay a whole lot of money.
yeah,
Unless you get some patents
yeah.
and get into the right biotech company, very, very unlikely that you're going to make a very decent living at it. And that's okay. It ends up being, in many cases, the domain of people who are young and strong and very intelligent and have no families.
Yeah.
And at some point, those people, that talent is simply lost. Go somewhere
And,
else.
and speaking of that, you actually went from the academic type background into data science, if I understand correctly.
I did. Yes, I wanted to go into bioinformatics, which would be the melding of computer science and biology, but I found it very difficult. I was looking to go into industry and I just really wasn't finding the right gig. So I said, well, just go all the way. I got myself a master's degree in computer science in 2 semesters.
Incredible. And George, I'd love to delve into the, data science and what does that mean in terms of people? Because I think there's some incredible opportunities as a GP that I think you offer that people I may or may not understand your competitive advantage and what you offer the marketplace.
Yeah, so I'd say most broadly, it's about creating actionable insights from data. It's a broad field. A lot of it has to do with dealing with data at scale. I like to talk about apartment investing at scale. That's where I get that from, in case you're
Right.
wondering. So yeah, well, you can be a landlord of single family units or do it at scale, buy apartments. But yeah, a lot of it also has to do with building statistical models. So there's a lot of ways that you can glean insights from data, and data scientists, they do it all.
And leading into the macroeconomic side of this podcast, I love your. I don't know if it might be critique. I think is a fair way to put it. You're fairly selective with data. I guess I'm trying to word this correctly. You don't just take it for face value, and I'd love to delve into that a little bit if you don't mind. I'm really fascinated by your willingness to say, "Well, wait a minute, this data point is here,
Yeah.
but is it any doggone good? Should we even be looking at this particular data point?"
Well, exactly. I think people all have their pet sources of data. Some people have their preconceived notions. Looking at a variety of data sources is often very valuable, but I'll just start at the very get-go. I've seen some pretty egregious errors in statistics. And if you've heard of Matthias Desmet, he's been studying the mass formation psychosis that seems to have taken over our society. Really great guy to look into. But the
Huh.
reason I'm bringing up here today is that his PhD was on statistical errors
Mm,
in research. And now,
interesting.
according to him, some shockingly large percentage of papers have significant errors in them. Uh, Now, I've never taken a scientific approach like that or a
Yeah.
systematic approach to studying any particular field and how error prone it may be, but it does ring true. So, some of the egregious things that I've seen go on in the statistical space is suppose you're building a model to predict the future.
Hmm.
Now, as we know, we can't include future data in our model, because how will you run the model? And of course, statisticians know this, but what we don't always know or realize or take the time to discover is how the data points that we think are tied to day January 1st of this year might have actually been backfilled after the fact.
Oh
And
my
I've
goodness.
actually seen, it's called target leakage. I've seen this in models,
Mhm.
and I've seen it literally impact the models that are actually presented and accepted and implemented. So some of the greatest statisticians that I've known and work with have made some crazy mistakes. I see people making inferences from descriptive statistics.
Mhm.
And Simpson's paradox would be a great example of that. If you look at admissions to graduate schools, for example, it looks like women are tremendously biased against. But when you consider the types of programs that men apply to and women apply to, in other words, when you break it down and say, if a woman applies to an engineering program, is there bias against her?
Mhm.
If a man applies to an English literature program, and the answer is no. And what was found is that it turns out that uh, women predominantly apply to graduate programs that just get a lot of applications, like English literature.
Right.
And departments like physics get mainly male applicants. And, there's only a few.
Almost what 99%. I mean, like somewhere like physics is like I rarely see a female PhD in physics, which we need more of. I'm all for it, but it in terms of selection, I mean, you have to want to do it, and so
Thank you.
it's strangely that field for some reason just very rarely do we have female physicists. It's really interesting.
Absolutely. And there's some fields which are dominated by women, such
Right.
as telomere research. And I'm personally against the idea of, using any forms of set asides or quotas to fix the
Right.
problem. I mean, would I want my telomere research done by a man just because he is a man? And
No.
what if discovering X or Y or Z about telomeres impacts cancer? And I'm harmed because of those quotas. So
Right.
it operates both ways. But yes, you're absolutely right. And so when you break it down by field, you find there's actually no bias. But people don't take the time to condition their statistics because we have this thing called emotion.
Yeah.
We've got this midbrain, this lizard brain that causes us to just want to win. Okay, okay.
um so we were talking about selection in terms of self-selecting into physics or self-selecting into telomere research. um
Right.
I have a feeling you may have some insight into evolutionary biology and this thing, like the natural law of like survival of the fittest. It feels like society does not really like survival of the fittest as an emotional level.
Right.
And it feels like it leaks into thinking and policy and whatnot. But the collision course that seems to completely, I guess, just because you don't want it to happen doesn't mean that it doesn't keep existing. Thoughts on that?
Very well put. And I don't hear my chuckling over the asking of your question, but evolutionary biology is something that really leads people to conclusions that tend to make people really angry. For example, there are actual differences between men and women, and I see these as complementary. I see it as a good thing, and I see it as a
Right.
wonderful thing, and I see it as respectful to both men and women to let a man be a man and
Right.
let a woman be a woman, and not try to override that.
Right.
But one thing I can tell you, and I don't know if we're leaving evolutionary biology to economics, but maybe that was the
That's
plan all
my
along.
motive. My
It
motive.
is that absolutely. So as we do develop a kinder and gentler society, for one thing, you see women get a whole lot more rights.
Right.
You don't see that in societies that are dirt poor.
Right.
And we do have a society in which people can choose. You can choose to raise children as a man, and let's be clear. I mean, if we were earning our living a couple of generations ago, it would probably be at least 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and it would probably be backbreaking. And it simply was not in the order of things that a man would have much time or even the energy after working like that to have much to do with his children. So a lot of that is good, but then I think that it brings with it obviously some bad things as well, because as we do get to be a kinder and gentler society, which is a good and wonderful thing, maybe we've forgotten some of the lessons that we learned in the past.
Well, I think that you and I are in agreement probably on this next statement. It is very controversial, and it's hard for me to admit. Dr. Steve King, has made a very scathing indictment of macroeconomics and the economics profession in general. To give you an example, so essentially, what his argument is that complex dynamic models are really where it should be in terms of more like a physics model, and basically economics has by leaving out what's the best way to put it, by leaving out things like finance, for example. So a lot of the finance models that in economics, or I should say, a lot of the models, and this is why 2008 happened in a large sense. In 2008, before that, they really didn't consider finance. They basically said it's a wash. So it fascinates me in terms of the discord between a field like biology and the field like economics, so to speak. So that's really what I was trying to weave into the discussion today, because you're fascinating background in both in
Right.
data and in biology, and saying, well, how do we make economics more like biology? I think is my that's a
Right.
long winding road to the question: how do we make economics behave more like biology?
Well, we need to do real experiments, but it's hard because
Right,
a lot of economics is determined by public policy,
right.
and public policy is tied to geography. And it's hard to say what happened. Did it happen here because other things were going on in this place at that time? Is it just the Rust Belt, or is it because these are blue states? Or is it because people like to move down south? Or is it because they're red states? And it's very hard to make those sorts of determinations. We need to do a whole lot of statistics, and it's hard because these are things that get at the heart. And as I was saying with the lizard brain before, I mean, when people draw conclusions that match their biases, well, they often, at that point, they just fail to condition their statistics. It's like, well, we got the answer we expected, and we're done.
Right.
And like, I think there was a very famous study where there was, I don't know if I call it fraud, but it was certainly very naive. They were studying how charitable different groups of people were.
Mhm.
And they decided that these people with the R next to their name were big, mean, nasty people. And when they saw a
Yeah.
difference between the two groups, they just said, well, it had to favor the group that they thought it would favor. But they actually got curious at one point. They went back to their notebook because they were doing the study blinded, which is the right
Mhm.
thing to do. But well, they forgot perhaps the most important part of blinding the study, which is unblinding it at the end to interpret the results. So
Well, and you say something really important, and I think that the role that confirmation bias plays, and you can even be highly, I mean, ridiculously educated, and confirmation bias is still hanging around. And I think that's an important thing to know for an investor, for example. You have to always have, like, I'm suggesting a checklist almost. It's like, is this confirmation bias, or is this the data telling me what? Am I seeing the data clearly? I think is, I guess, what I'm driving at.
Well, absolutely. And I would say if I was going to make one rule of statistics, I would say always, always, always condition your statistics. If you haven't conditioned your statistics, it shows a complete lack of interest and a complete lack of curiosity. And you should always do it. It's fun. It's fun to go look for alternative explanations. And if you
Right.
don't do that, then maybe someone else will do that, and you'll be embarrassed that your last 3 or 4 papers
You're like,
turned out to be garbage.
they were complete trash.
Yes, happens.
I guess. And I'm fascinated by Markov chain Monte Carlo, and I'm curious. Did you delve into that aspect of Bayesian statistics at all?
So I've been exposed to all forms of statistics, but you might be surprised that some of the simpler methods like regression actually get applied a lot more often
Hmm.
than the things that we hear about in statistical journals.
Hmm. That's interesting, and it feels like a really complicated model like that may or may not be necessary. It's like if you have a easy model to fix an easy problem, use the easy model. I guess kind of an Occam's razor almost, right?
Absolutely.
All right.
But that's the problem. I guess to draw it all together, the issue is that it's difficult to do actual experiments in economics. And so what happens is we do a lot of model building, which may or may not represent the actual universe. To simplify it enough that you can make it mathematical may not be valid, and to make it complex enough to be valid, you know, don't know how far you are off from reality at that point. It's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, that I think that's the I guess the right word is intrigue I have at this point is complex nonlinear dynamics is very difficult mathematically. So the more nonlinear dynamics you have in your model, the more difficult the model, right? And it's not just easy math either. I think that's part of the problem. The math is by nature harder. And so we, in order to make the model useful, as they say, uh, you have to add nonlinear into it. So it really is a fascinating topic, and I feel like that's part of the struggle is the mathematics of complex dynamics is really tough, and I'd be interested in your thinking on that.
Well, again, I think, obviously, at the end of the day, all we really can do is we can work to build models that make more sense,
Mm,
follow the rules of statistical validity, and in most cases, yes, make simple models. Simple models meaning things like even, regression, for example, can
mhm,
explain a lot of things. And if you do it right, or if you're doing inferential statistics and you condition properly,
mm.
then you can come to the right conclusions. And shouldn't be too hard on the profession, of course. Science, all sciences move forward in terms of paradigm shifts.
Yep.
And so it's natural that we're all going to run in much the same direction for a long period of time because we want to build on the past. If we weren't building on solid ground, that was the problem before empiricism, right? And
Right.
so from time to time, we need to have those shifts, and they are not easy to come by.
Well, I think that leads us to a fantastic time to delve into the real estate side of the Real Estate Macro podcast. Now that we've geeked out on data for a while, thank you, George, for actually going there with me on that. That stuff is my current obsession, I guess is the right word. So it's great to have you give us some insight into that. But moving into real estate, how did you first get interested in real estate, and what was that process like for you?
So it really came to me through entrepreneurship. When I helped to launch the family construction business, I decided that entrepreneurship was for me. This was the place to be. My sense of adventure had previously been quenched through pushing back the frontiers of knowledge, and I still love that. However, I realized that it was a lot more fun to be the captain of my own ship. And from that point on, although I did continue in tech and I had some great achievements, I did get to win an award as a data scientist. I can't say that my heart was really so much in it. Uh, I just decided I had to be an entrepreneur, and so I already knew how to be a landlord,
Mhm.
and so I decided I would be a landlord at scale,
Oh,
invest in apartments.
there you go. And so when you first went down that road, what was the initial challenge in getting that going for you?
Well, it being completely different, I always valued communication skills, but I really had to 10x it or maybe turn it up to 11 to do this
Yeah.
because I have to speak to investors, I have to find business partners, and I'm literally out there all day long, having one-on-one conversations, going on podcasts, having people on my own podcast, going to events. Like, for example, this morning, I happened to be writing a letter to the Michigan Supreme Court because we are considering extending permanently are coronavirus measures as they relate to the rental market. And
Mhm.
I see you, you're peering at me through one eye there. Yeah, Doug, I am shocked myself after a crisis that was in many ways caused so much both directly and indirectly by government. Now we're going to now we're talking about codifying these rules. So I went out to the Detroit Metropolitan Apartment Agency last night. They had a great little party, and at the end, one of the members who's really deep into the governmental relations side, Megan Orser, she said, "Well, look, you ought to write a letter about this." And I thought, well, you're right. It's not easy to do this. It's really easy to say, I've got other things to do. I got to manage my assets. But I did spend about 45 minutes putting this together this morning because it isn't easy. It's not easy to write even a short note based on your personal experience of exactly why these things are wrong. So I'll give you a quick example. If you apply for rental assistance, you're supposed to get a 3-day stay,
Mhm.
right? Well, you don't even have to show evidence
Right.
that you've applied, and you don't even have to provide any information as to why you might even be considered. And the rental assistance that exists now is nothing like what existed during the height of the pandemic. So
Right.
probably won't pay for everything. And you probably have to stop paying in the first place to be considered. And I've seen waves of non-payment go like this. When a
Right.
new government program comes out and said, hey, we'll help you pay your rent if you can't pay, lo and behold, next month you have these strategic non-payers.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I mentioned in that short note. So again, wow, the opportunity to grow as a communicator, that was outstanding for me.
Well, and that this is great, and I want to loop back into our natural selection argument and weave them together nicely here. Unfortunately, a capitalist economy has a creative destruction aspect to it, and it's the part of us that we don't necessarily like, but it's almost a part of the puzzle. And it feels like by trying to use policy to hand wave, no, there's no creative destruction going on here, folks.
Right.
Um, Now, I will say, and the flip side of this is, I'm not completely opposed to some government programs. I completely support Social Security, for example. And this might actually shock you, George. I actually think the Canadian healthcare model is superior to the American model, personally. But where it should stop is somewhere around, oh, okay, you get to live here rent free forever. And what I really feel like's missing in the political conscious or understanding is like, okay, real estate entrepreneurs are a business, and I think there's a misconception that all real estate owners are just independently wealthy with unlimited resources, and so we're shifting the burden from some sort of government program to the entrepreneurial class of real estate owners, and so it feels like you're facing that exact uh, cognitive dissonance, I guess, in the marketplace, or that willingness to say, well, George, we think you look an awful lot like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny because you're a landlord. Therefore, it's now your problem.
Well, sounds exactly like the conversation I was having last night, and it was a costume party, by the way, Douglas. But we did not have any Easter bunnies there. But I think that the government might see us as a cross between the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus,
Right.
and it's really sad because, for example, I've invested a lot in Orange County, Florida. Okay, me and my partners have put a ton of money. I won't tell you how much, but let me just say that I don't think we're going to be doing that in the future if rent control passes. And I mean, I see you nodding your head. It's one of those things where if you understand, if you get it, no explanation is necessary.
Right.
If you don't, no explanation is possible.
Well, this is really the heart of the matter, and I do have my critiques of economics, but in this particular case, a simple market supply, market demand argument versus uh, monopoly. And unfortunately, what I don't think they understand they're doing by creating a policy like this, they're completely disincentivizing more supply. So
Well, are they,
essentially,
Douglas? I'll challenge you on that. What does a politician need a supply of?
well, again, this. they're trying to get elected. That's their self-interest.
Exactly. They need a supply of votes.
They
So
need
what
a
they're
supply
doing
of
is
votes.
increasing the supply. It's just not increasing the supply of what people actually
Right.
need.
So what I'm afraid they don't understand is, okay, guys, if you do this, there are negative consequences that if you play the tape out, guess what? You are, for existing landowners that don't have to comply to the rent thing here. So what it does is it creates more expensive A class properties. Those are the only people who are going to want to build. So the people that will build is the A class category, because we're going to not even play with that. We're just going to, people who have no problem paying their rent will just build A class product. And guess what? The very people you're trying to help, the people that are struggling with rent and are more in the working class working force category, guess what you're doing? You're completely disincentivizing any market solution. And guess what? The willingness will precipitously drop to offer that product.
Exactly. But
Categorically.
you also have to look at the willingness of people in that group to vote for such policies.
Right.
And once you consider that, it's obvious what's going on. Well, Douglas, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to go back to the capitalist system.
Sure.
So you mentioned capitalism does have this element, and I would call it a stated element of creative destruction.
Right.
Okay. You look at communism, I would call that plain destruction. Now,
Yeah.
it's
Oh, and
it's
by the way, we tried that and we probably gave it an F already. I think we did anyway. I think we failed it.
well, I would say if you talk to Eastern Europeans, these are people who either lived through communism or their parents lived through communism.
Right.
And these people tend to have very definite views on economics.
Right.
They don't want the government, Big Brother, getting inside their lives.
Right.
But to get back to Henry Hazlitt, Economics in a Single Lesson, and his first chapter is about what is seen and what is unseen.
Mm-hmm.
The only way that you can beat something is with effort, right? The only way to do something perfectly is to do nothing at all, right? Thomas Sowell, paraphrase there. And I think that's why people go for communism, because with capitalism, you do have that scene, that acknowledged element of creative destruction. But when you do let the government take over things, what is not seen is all of the innovation that might have happened, all of the investment that might have happened, and all of the minds that might apply themselves to a problem, but decide, hey, I'm done with this. Just like me and most other people who have a successful scientific career, right? Publish several papers and you say, thank you, I'm done,
I'm
and I'm
good.
going to do something more remunerative. And
Right.
it happens every day throughout our economy.
Mhm. And so moving into that and saying, well, as a real estate entrepreneur and moving forward, in fact, I wish, I hope the best for you, and I hope you fight the good fight on this. But if they win, guess what, George? I'm going to speculate that you will probably move on to other markets that won't be punitive toward landlords.
Oh, absolutely. And again, you have to take a look at the both market participants. The other set of market participants are the politicians, and they will also move on to different markets. They'll go from the town council to maybe the county commission. Maybe they'll become state senators. Some of them may go on to Congress. But I've heard it also said that the definition of addiction is if it makes you feel good in the present and the consequences are further down the road, well, that's addictive by definition, right? That's probably another Thomas Sowell quote there. But that's exactly what happens with rent control. The positive consequences are immediate and they are seen, right? My rent stopped going up. The negative consequences are further on down the line and they are unseen. You don't see the building that wasn't constructed, and you don't see the building that wasn't renovated.
That's right. And I think that is what I'm most concerned with is the on the political side. I feel like the understanding of the input cost of what we're trying to deliver to the marketplace. And they are correct. There should always be a minimum safety standard. I'm not advocating for dysregulation at all. I'm not saying that one bit. But the degree at which they're trying to micromanage the market, and saying, well, we need you to go. Okay, and I'm this is mainly directed at California. It's my favorite target. Very good whipping boy for this particular next rant I'm about to go on. we're going to make you go through 17 different committees. We're going to make you go through a design review where we're going to tell you, well, we don't like the color you're about to paint this building. Good Lord, people, you have a housing crisis and you're sitting around like complaining about the color of the building I'm proposing. It really is maddening almost to look at the illogical behavior around this particular topic. And so the bottom line is I guess the onus is more on us as entrepreneurs to educate the market to say, do you realize what it takes to actually bring this? And do you understand that most real estate investors are entrepreneurs and trying to deliver a product? We don't have independent wealth. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I can promise you that. And so I rely on outside investors. The only way I can deliver a product to you is if I can create a return for my investors. That's the only way it's going to happen. We can't rely on government to fix this. Now they can do certain things like the like loan guarantees and support more affordable housing. There are policies that can help, but they're not being discussed right now to the extent I can tell. So bottom line, to wrap up my rant, do you, George, feel like they're getting educated to the level we need to do? Meaning the politicians.
The politicians, absolutely not. And it's just a different sort of person that's drawn to politics.
Yeah.
You have people that are drawn to academia. You have people that are drawn to industry. And the politicians, they're a third animal. And unfortunately, they're not always the sorts of people who have been founding the businesses, and they don't have those experiences. And we're supposed to have a representative democracy, and it is if we do take the trouble and we do educate ourselves and take the time to participate in the process, then, as Benjamin Franklin have said, what sort of government did you give us? Well, a republic, if you can keep it.
Yeah.
So people who are business owners, they have to get out there and just like the letter I was mentioning this morning, I would prefer to be working on operations or meeting new investors, but it's very important that people who do have my experiences do get out there, because for every landlord, you've got, I don't know, maybe 30 tenants. And those are the voices that are going to be heard if we don't take the time.
And I completely agree. I think this is one of the things that really is important. And again, I think there are roles to mitigate and ameliorate the sometime unkind nature of capitalism. I don't think anybody's going to sit here and say that capitalism isn't ruthless sometimes. But that's the cold reality is that we cannot wish capitalism away. We cannot wish creative destruction, and we cannot meritocracy. At the end of the day, there's no level playing field, and the desire to create a level playing field is just pure folly in my mind.
Well, I would say that what you have to do is you have to define it carefully. So how can you have a level playing field? Okay, some people are born more attractive, more articulate. Some people, maybe their parents made a lot more money,
right,
and they're guided in a certain direction. But you, I think, have to really turn the question on its head. If a guy who stuttered became one of the greatest orators of all time, Winston Churchill, I mean, he had to memorize his speeches.
right.
Literally, the man memorized his speeches. Anybody who's good at speaking will tell you, you don't memorize your speeches, you memorize an outline of the speech,
Right.
But that's what he had to do because he was naturally so inarticulate. So when I look at somebody like that, and I see them winning, when I look at somebody like Stephen Hawking, who had so many disadvantages and did so much for the field of physics, we have to, I think, look at the expansive nature of human potential. And we have to say, look, we're not all going to be born with the same faculties, but isn't it better that the surgeon have gifted hands?
Right.
Isn't it better that the physicist have a skilled mind? And that the teacher should be able to relate concepts effectively. So yes, at the end of the day, we're all served better by a meritocracy. And for example, you talk about landlords and tenants. These are often the same people, okay? I'm a tenant, I've got a boat, so I rent my slip.
Right.
But maybe on a more serious note, when I moved out of my house the first time, I didn't buy a house, okay? I rented. And
Right.
I think that if you ask people, Probably that's the experience of 99% of us. And yeah, I'll share with you a quick story if you don't mind.
Yeah, please. This
Yeah,
this discussion is maybe really high level for folks,
yeah.
but I think it's really important one that we don't
Yeah.
have enough current in society. Of okay, wait a minute, we're trying to tamp down natural selection, but just because you don't want it to be there, it doesn't mean it's going to go away.
Well, yes. Again, we have to be kind. We have people today who can survive with tremendous disabilities, and
Right.
that's good. That's wonderful. But the thing of it is that there are also bad ways in which our compassion can be applied or misapplied, I would say. And when you want to try and make up for the fact that life isn't fair, you can't. Some people will have a shorter lifespan than others, and
Yep.
and that's just a fact. Some people will lose their life to an accident that is no fault of their own.
That's
There
right.
is simply no way to make life completely fair. What we can do is we can hold people accountable when they do something wrong, and we can pay homage to our ever expanding ability to expand our abilities. Our human potential is literally limitless. So I think that there's two things we can do in our society, and unfortunately, I think politics has us do too much of the latter. So the first would be let's pay attention to our ability to forever grow. All right.
Right.
Adopt this growth mindset and just worship human potential. On the other hand, there are people who feel like they're losing or that the world isn't fair. And you know what? They're right. I've lost too. The world has been unfair to me too. But I can either dwell in the past or I can live in the present and look towards the future. And I think that's really what we need to do. Again, it gets back to politicians. A lot of them are going to get elected just by griping. And
What?
and
Oh my
and we're going to
gosh,
have
that
more griping in our
I think.
society as a result.
Oh my gosh, I see it going on both sides. Honestly, that's what's really frustrating for me. I'm like, wait a minute, we are in the greatest country ever to know the planet. And capitalism has delivered. I mean, really, when you think about it, and I laugh about this too. My grandparents had a farm on in southeastern Colorado, and they were literally dust bowl. They got through the dust bowl. They lived in literally just a basically a block of stone, right? A cube of stone, basically, is what they lived in to get through the dust bowl. And so anytime I have a problem, I'm like, I'm sitting here in my air conditioned room and start complaining and feeling bad for myself because I had a negative experience. And it's like where we have lifted capitalism lifted mankind out of absolute misery, and then it seems like we've created a whole other set of misery too. So it's very 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 fascinating deep dive.
Well, if you want
um
me to bring biology back into it, I'll tell you
Please.
exactly what's going on. Yes, it has lifted us out of misery. And I try to remind myself just how amazing life is. I consider a car to be a necessity. And could you imagine that throughout human history, to have the ability that I can go between city and country literally whenever I want for a tank of gas, maybe
Yeah.
less,
Yeah.
that it's amazing. Today, poor people have iPhones, right? The guy who asks you for $1 on the street and says, "What, man? Just $1?" He
Right.
probably has an iPhone. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's sad. So why aren't people happy? We have in many ways reached the stage of universal opulence,
Mhm.
but do we recognize it? No,
We really
because
don't.
we are hierarchically programmed.
Yep.
Okay, just to use a simplifying term, and not to go through the whole mechanism of evolution, but we are literally designed to seek a hierarchy, and and again, you can explain that in a mechanistic way. It's a lot longer. I'm going to use the shorthand. So people all they want to be better looking than their neighbor, right? It's not about being good looking. It's about being better looking than your neighbor.
Right.
It's about being richer than your neighbor. It's about having a better job title than your neighbor. And so that's the problem, is that human beings think that money will solve their problem, but they don't realize what they're actually doing. They're literally fighting for their dominance, their hierarchy in the dominant system.
That's right.
And regardless of what it is, whether it's earning more money, getting the better job title, or simply being liked more in the world. Even those thumbs up on Facebook,
Right.
that's addictive. It's a drug. And that's what we're
Yes.
programmed to do. So we can literally never have more than a small fraction of the population that's rich. And people say, well, I want to redistribute wealth. Well, not only is that going to create less wealth over the long term, but it's not going to solve the problem. Unless everybody is precisely the same dirt poor, there's going to be jealousy, and there will always be something to be jealous about. So if people, I think, would just focus on the real issue, which is that human nature is a constant. Okay, we have the same biology that our ancestors had. We have jealousy, we have anger, we have all these negative emotions. That's the problem. The problem is not that you don't have an exotic car, which, if everybody had an exotic car, would cease to be exotic.
That's right. I cannot thank you so much for being willing to delve into this, because we're, again, the discussion um is at such a superficial level. You got 30-second sound bites on TV, and me personally, I think TV is an absolute waste of time. You cannot have a serious discussion about these kinds of things without deep thinking, and I guess maybe that's unreasonable of us to consider and to ponder for other folks. But thank you, George, for being willing to go here. Now, I think it is fairly time to discuss your tremendous experiences in real estate, and focus a little bit more now on your real estate experiences, because you've done a tremendous had a tremendous journey. And tell us about that first deal when you really like, oh man, I got on the board, and how did that go?
Yeah, so interesting. The first deal, it literally came from LoopNet, and people say that that's where deals go to die, but
Right.
sometimes you'll find them out there,
Yeah.
and maybe somebody's just asking for too much money. So what does the broker do? Well, I'm done with this for now. I'll put it on LoopNet, and if it's been there long enough, maybe they're ready to deal. So that was exactly the case. There were two deals that fell through. This was during the height of the pandemic, and in August of 2020, we were able to close on this. So I want to say it was probably maybe May, June, that we were getting it under contract. So this is when everybody was frightened, right? Things were shutting down, especially if you're in C-class properties, because a lot of those people are in food service, for example. They're doing occupations where you literally have to show up. You're actually doing something. You're not just like being an intellectual like we are right now.
Right.
But all kidding aside, those were the people losing their jobs, and it took a little guts to put the offer in, but that's what it took. And I think that is really a lesson in life there. No matter what field you're in, I mean, if you're waiting for the perfect opportunity, it's going to go to somebody more qualified than you.
Oh
It's
my
going to go to
gosh.
somebody who has more experience than you.
Thank
If
you.
you are looking for your great break, you're probably going to take a deal that has a little hair on it,
Right.
a flat roof, a smaller number of units. Maybe the area is not perfect, or there are renovations that need to be done. I just went into a property a couple months ago. We closed on this, and it's a real mess. Uh, phew. Walking in and spotting cockroaches on the opposite
Ooh.
wall, push the door open. Now, that's what
Ah,
I've been told. When you
oh,
when you walk into an apartment you don't know the cleanliness of, you
right.
push the door open, because if the cockroaches are going to fall, you want them to
You
fall
don't
in front of
want
you,
them to fall on you.
not in your hair.
That's right.
Yeah, I pushed the door open, and yes, they were horrible. So I'm telling you that if you really want to make money, and particularly when you're new, you're going to have to take those deals with hair on them, and make it a matter of pride. Your guru might say, "Hey, bring me a C-class property in a B-class area with a pitched
Mm,
roof, and I want it to be 100 units or more, and I want there to be no problems here." Well, that's because that's what your guru is good at closing, and your guru
right.
wants something that's not a lot of trouble, but it's going to be really hard for you to find. So go look for that deal, find it if you can, bring it to an experienced sponsor, close the deal. But more than likely, what you're going to do, and that's what we were doing at the same time too, looking for that 100 and above deal. And what do we find? 14 units in Orlando. And we had extraordinary tailwinds.
Mm,
Rents have gone up there like crazy. They had fewer COVID restrictions. People love their theme parks. So when things rebounded, we were able to get it, literally one of the few discounts out there during COVID,
right.
because there weren't a whole lot of discounts. And and we got extraordinary rebounds. So that's really what you need to do.
And George, can you tell us a little bit more about your Florida portfolio? And this is not the only property you did in Florida, is that right?
Exactly. So we like Florida. We've got good boots on the ground. We've got Mark Prokop. He's our great equity partner and construction leader. And so we can take on these big deals. That's the other thing you have to do. You have to say, well, what is an opportunity for you?
Hmm.
You know, as if opportunity were a one size fits all. What are your skills? What are your
Yes.
likes and your dislikes? Which, by the way, over time, what you like doing will probably become your skill much more than whatever your skills are right now.
Right.
So, what do you want to contribute? What can you contribute now? What can your partners contribute? This is what determines whether you have an opportunity. And I always muse at how there are, 100 opportunities that people go over to accept one. Part of that is because there are different types of buyers out there. You might have a foreign buyer that can't get a return in their country. You might have somebody wanting to park money. You might have a broken 1031 exchange. There are a lot of reasons why it might actually make sense to overpay for a property. They may have different return metrics than you. But I know that somebody is going to buy that deal. And in many cases, it's somebody with your similar return metrics. They're either better at controlling costs, they're better at doing the renovations, they understand operations better, or they simply have a better vision for the property.
That's
The right
amazing.
vision for the property
Yes.
is extraordinarily valuable. And if you have that, you will make a lot more money than somebody who's just running spreadsheet calculations all day and saying, well, this one looks like it might satisfy my return metrics.
That's amazing, George. And I think one thing that I really despise about real estate education and gurus is they paint this unicorn rainbows and yellow diamonds and whatever the Lucky Charm cereal was. But they paint this picture that real estate is like it's easy, the easy button. Let's talk about a hard real estate problem that you're facing. Currently, you were affected by the hurricane. You can tell us a little bit about what you're navigating to get through that.
Yeah, I mean, we got broken windows, tenants that are not paying. We had trouble getting down there. Our property management company had difficulty getting down there. So all these things, both economic, physical, and perhaps a combination of the two, are things we're facing. But if you really want to hear about a problem, the biggest issue down there, it's Avon Park, Florida, is crime. It's a
Oh,
difficult place
yeah.
to invest. It's a difficult place to live.
Mhm.
And one of the things we need to do is just keep the crime down. So I've been
Right.
talking to the police. I've been talking to the Baptist church across the street. I've been working to win the trust of our tenants. So, three things that we've done. First of all, they don't have their own police force. They get that from the county.
Mhm.
So I contacted the police sergeant who is in charge of policing that town. Told her what I had planned and let her know that we were working to improve, the lighting and put some cameras up. Make sure that we're not easy pickings because that most crimes are crimes of opportunity. They're going to move somewhere else.
That's right.
Well, hopefully, if you keep squeezing the balloon, eventually, you're going to have less crime.
That's
But the
right.
first thing you have to do is just remove the opportunity. So we're making a contribution just by right now, as we record this, putting up lights and security cameras. So that's the first step. But she is an expert in crime prevention through environmental design. That's called SEPTED. So when we think
Nice.
we're done, she's going to walk through and tell us, hey, these are the things you missed. This is what you could do better. And we're going to take that and we're going to take it to heart. We're going to do everything that we can in good conscience put in that capital budget. Because, it is a business at the end of the day. And then our property manager also reached out to the police and was able to get a police car out there for
Nice.
1 or 2 hours a day. That's called the COPS program. And
Mhm.
so we spent a lot of time out there. We reached out to the local agencies that provide assistance to low income people.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned, to the Baptist church. So we know that she has a problem. The lady who owns the Baptist church and who runs the prayer meetings there most of the week. People walking across her property and in between and not respecting the property, and that's not good. So when you have concerned citizens and they band together, there's no limit to what you can accomplish. So that's what I would talk about having a vision. Now, if I just wanted to make more money, sure, I could have done any one of those things, but it's unlikely that I would have done all of those things without actually caring about the residents because I know that my bottom line doesn't get better until their lives get better.
That's
When it
right.
becomes a better place to live, better people will want to live there. And the people who currently live there will have more incentive to pay because they do not want to get kicked out.
That's right. And this is the part of capitalism that I think we miss, and most entrepreneurs always discover this point. At the end of the day, for us to be successful, and this is the ultimate flip side of capitalism, we have to provide massive amounts of service, and the more service we provide, the more successful we are. It's the law of compensation in capitalism that I think is missed by most people, because if you're getting a W-2 job, you don't necessarily realize it as much. But in an entrepreneurship, if we don't provide massive service, then we will not be as successful as we need to be, and that is how it should be.
Exactly right. It is not by the benevolence of the butcher or the baker that we get our bread and our meat to put on the table.
That's right.
Adam Smith.
Absolutely, completely agree. I think this is fascinating, George, and I'd like to pivot now into your wonderful. I really love your conversion project, and I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how you discovered the opportunity, and what you're working on to, I guess, change this property from a use that's not really needed in the marketplace to something that is definitely more in demand.
Well, there you go. Creative destruction. We have these apartments, I should say, we have these hotels that are going down because of Airbnb and because people, if they do travel, are wanting to travel in other ways, like with their camper.
Mhm.
So what to do? Well, the structure is good and it costs a whole lot more to start from scratch. So particularly if you've got an extended stay, larger rooms, you've got kitchenettes already in the rooms or in most of the rooms, and you've got populations that like smaller rooms. Like, for example, millennials tend to like smaller rooms and seniors as well. So if you have a burgeoning senior population, and suppose you have all of these things, you're sitting at the confluence of all of these things, then what do you have? You have what I call the deal that ticks all the boxes. Now, I've seen people renovate these hotels and they knock down the walls because they know that the community is not going to absorb 100 or 200 efficiency units. Well, that's very expensive. So again, you have to start with the right property. You can't move it, right? So it's got to be in the right location. You got to understand the demographics. So do you have a structure that supports what you want to do? And can you work with the council too, right? You got to rezone everything. You've got to get out of the franchise agreement. So if you're the sort of person who can do those things and who's willing to do those things during due diligence, and of course, have the appropriate clauses in your purchase and sale agreement that you can get out if these things don't happen, well, then you're the sort of person who can benefit grandly from this massive demographic and otherwise real estate shift that's going on in the market. We need to convert to housing right now. So that's what I call this deal. I call it the deal that ticks all the boxes, and we'd love to talk about it more. We're actually still raising capital for that. So
Great.
as this goes to press, you probably still have the opportunity to invest in the deal. We've closed on it. There's very little risk at this point. We have some CapEx budget, but we are continuing to raise our CapEx budget, wanting to increase that velocity of turning these units. And again, as you mentioned, we don't get paid until we've provided value. So looking forward to
Absolutely.
partnering with your listeners.
And George, on that point, are you looking for more conversion opportunities, or where do you see yourself moving along the path here, and what's looking
Well,
exciting to
the
you?
housing crisis will be here for a long time. Every time I look at the housing statistics around the middle of the month, they usually come out around the 17th. I see that our starts, completions, and permits are all around 1.5 million.
Right.
And the optimism is gone. We used to see starts and permits way above 1.5 million, which is our long run average.
Right.
But now we don't see that. So
Right.
what that tells me is that even the leading indicators are back to the long-term average. And that means that we are going to have a housing crisis for a long time. I'm looking to contribute any way I can. And again, it's a massive and awesome responsibility. It's humbling to be a capitalist because I know that the decisions I make are impacting the world. So my sister and I and our family business, we are building houses. We're building single family homes. Now, these are tending to be for the higher end, but I
Right.
tell you, though, you have to think of the
Still,
margins, right? Whatever happens to the higher end, it's going to impact
all the way
everything.
down, and that's
So
another thing
absolutely.
that
So
I
yeah,
know
so we
people.
can't
Oh
say that
man,
this isn't impacting the crisis.
hundred
So
percent.
those people need a place to live.
That's right.
And the resources that would otherwise go into rehabbing a more ordinary home to make it something more appropriate for somebody with money, well, those resources can go into something else. So I love the hotel to multifamily conversion. I think it's an outstanding play. I also like build to rent. That's sort of the missing middle, right? I
Yes.
mean, you always have housing falling into disrepair. So
Right.
there's always going to be housing, for the poorer tenants to some degree.
Right.
You're always going to have it for the rich because that's the most lucrative to build. And where is this missing middle? Well, build to rent is that sort of thing. Suppose you're a senior and you don't want to cut your lawn. You don't mind a small lot, and you'd like things close by. You would like the pool. You'd like the gym. You'd like to have all of these facilities that you get with an apartment, but you want your own four walls. Well,
That's right.
build to rent is perfect. So it fits in with a lot of demographic trends. So I see myself as branching out from multifamily because, again, it's easier to get into multifamily than it is to get into build to rent.
Right.
You don't have to entitle the property to do some renovations. You got to pull some permits, but it's a completely different process, totally different level. So you see all these people streaming into multifamily, and I think some of us, again, that creative destruction, if we head for the exits towards the periphery and start creating housing in other ways, particularly through development, right?
Yes.
That is
Yes.
the
Yes.
source. We need renovators and flippers
Can I
to
can I get an amen?
exactly.
That's right.
Amen, brother. So we need renovators, flippers to keep the housing stock from falling into disrepair. But without people building new housing stock, we can't do it.
I completely agree. My money where my mouth is. I'm in the same thinking that you are, and our friends like Andy McMullen doing build to rent. We have so many great folks looking in that space right now. And to that end, I guess people don't realize the 2008 wiped out so many developers, and then as the housing crisis played out, okay, great. We 2010, 2011, 2012. Okay, we have all this excess product and inventory finally gets, absorbed, reintegrated back into the marketplace. By 2013 and 14, it's like, okay, things are going along okay. And then we have a year like last year. Last year didn't happen if they didn't get crushed like in 2008. So the need for expedited approvals, and that's another big thing right now. There needs to be a massive awareness of how bad bureaucratic uh, there just needs to be more speed on the government side. And again, this is an education product process. It's one I'm committed to doing. By the way, as maybe as strident as I might have sounded today in this interview, I am committed to helping and trying to educate and say, hey, uh, this is a problem we control, and we by me I mean us in this room, in when we're talking to people in government, saying we control this problem by saying, well, do we want more houses or do we want less houses? Do we want this to be fixed now, or do we want to continue to suffer under a huge lag, or do we want to speed this up? And I feel like
Right.
that's the education that needs to happen, and understand, and they're under a lot of duress too. There's a lot of political backlash for having the courage to say, hey, look, we're going to expedite this process. So we just have to say, all right, let's educate this. Let's have a good discussion about what do we really want to be as a country. Do we really want neighborhoods that are governed by monopoly, essentially? And I don't think we do. So anyway, that's my little soapbox. As George knows, I am prone to do is get up on the soapbox
I
about
let
that.
it out,
That's
Douglas.
right.
Tell us how
That's
you
right.
really feel.
Just
And
have to
people need to
say,
do that.
that's right.
Right, because there's so-called politically correct opinions which
Yeah,
have been ruling the airwaves, and
yeah.
that's not good. It's not healthy for our society.
It's not
We need
fixing
people who can,
anything. Is it getting better? We've had political correctness in over what? How many years now? At
I
least
don't know,
five,
30
right?
years at least, but
Maybe.
I would
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
we need people who can think two steps ahead.
That's right.
It's easy to think about what we can see immediately in terms of the value of public policy, but we need people who are going to be a little curmudgeonly
Yeah.
and get up there and say, yes, but if we pay Paul What about the fact that we had to rob Peter?
Right.
And it's called the Forgotten Man. Although
That's right.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he turned it around. He made the Forgotten Man the one who was poor in the street. But the
Right.
original Forgotten Man poem is all about, hey, Peter was the one who had to pay for all that. How does Peter feel about this?
Right. Absolutely. That's completely in line with what we're thinking here. George, it feels like we had a great discussion, and we covered the deep underpinnings of evolutionary biology and real estate. We managed to weave them together. I think that's quite an incredible accomplishment, by the way. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without your brilliant intellect. And I've got to ask you, finally, is there any question I didn't ask you that I should have?
Well, probably. I'll tell you what. I don't think you asked me directly about NIMBYism.
Yes.
So let's address that. So I was talking to a very experienced developer yesterday. He builds build to rent by the hundreds in Florida in some very rapidly growing areas. And he likes to hold a town hall.
Mm,
And of course, you're going to have to face the people when you go to City Hall and
yeah.
in your planning meeting and in your public meetings, I'd rather to say. But when he goes there, he likes to say, hey, are any of you tenants? Do any of you know tenants? Maybe because again, it's the property owners that tend to show up to the city council meetings. Maybe your brother, maybe a parent, maybe a child, somebody a friend, and people raise their hand like, yeah, oh, I know tenants. Okay. All right. Are these bad people? And people say, no, no, no,
No,
they're not
no.
bad people. No, no, these are my family. These are my friends. And then he'll say, well, look, what we're trying to do here, I'm not trying to destroy the value of your homes. I'm trying to build homes for people that are just like you, that just don't happen to have the money for a down payment right now, or
Oh
maybe
man.
their credit needs to be repaired. Maybe you were there 5, 10, maybe 20 years ago. This is what I'm trying to do. And he tries to humanize it. And I think that's important, right? We shouldn't dehumanize any group of people in our society, not the rich, not the poor, not the landowners, not the tenants. We need to have a balance of rights. We all need rights so that we can have a healthy society.
Right.
And I think that when we recognize each other's humanity, that I think it becomes a lot easier to accept the need for more ordinary housing or even for affordable housing.
That's right. Thank you so much, and that's an absolutely beautiful crescendo for communicating better. And again, I sometimes get a little frustrated, and I don't think I'm communicating as well as I could. And that is such a beautiful way of doing it and saying forced empathy. Like think about your neighbors and think about your family. That's who we're trying to help here. We're not trying to bring in newly released convicts to live right next door to you. That's not what we're trying to do. I know you don't like that. We're not trying to necessarily give somebody a second chance that should probably possibly need one.
Well, they'll get a
But
chance at some
that's
place
right.
in the community, and
That's
it's
right.
probably going to be a higher crime area of the community. But
Yep.
you're right. You don't want to allow people that have done the right thing and who are paying a high rent and who are doing everything they can to provide their children and their family and themselves with opportunities to have that ruined by some tenants that are not following the law. So
That's right.
absolutely.
And I also think that the flip side of this argument too, in terms of um, we don't need, and again, I think this is the thesis of today's podcast. We aren't seeking equality; we're seeking equality of opportunity.
Yes.
And so, by creating policy that is contrary to that, we're actually killing equality of opportunity.
Right.
And I think that that's the ultimate thesis why these housing policies that they're trying to do in Michigan are so destructive. It's you're trying to create equality, quote unquote, but what you're doing is destroying opportunity, and we just
Yeah.
have to make sure
Ask me
that
how many
that's
rental units I
intentional.
have in Michigan.
That's right. How many rental units do you have in Michigan?
So actually, I do have one. My sister is running right now. It's on our construction site. We would have sold it, but for the fact we don't want somebody to paint it pink and start grilling on the front porch. So,
That's
uh,
right.
That's why we have one rental unit in Michigan, and
That's right.
when we sell it, we are not going to acquire more. So,
Right.
I didn't tell this to the Michigan Supreme Court, but I'll say it to you here today: is, you've already lost George Roberts,
Right.
but let's make sure that you don't enact policies that are further unfriendly to the landlords, causing further landlords to want to leave the state or to invest out of the state. We need housing stock in Michigan. This is my state. It's personal for me.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great mic drop. George, if people want to reach out to you and get to know more about your opportunities and build to rent and other investment opportunities, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way is George at horizonmultifamily.com. Shoot me an email. Another great way is through LinkedIn. I'm still very
Great.
open. You can send a message to me, connection request, whether you want to learn more, whether you have deals to bring me, or whether you'd like to invest passively. I would love to have you reach out, love to get to know you. And particularly if you're in Michigan, anywhere in the Detroit metro, I run a couple of in-person events. So by all means, if you're a real estate investor in my area, I want you to send that connection request so that I can send you an invite. I'd love to meet you in person and love to figure out how we can build this Michigan real estate community.
That's incredible, George. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Douglas. I greatly appreciated the opportunity.
Absolutely.